Hello there everybody, this is Jorge Varela for thebuttonsmashers.com and here's our video review of Berserk and the Band of the Hawk for PlayStation Vita. The short version of the review goes like this. It's pretty average. I mean, it's fun, but the story and animated cutscenes completely emasculate the gameplay. If you have played a Musou game before, you have absolutely played this. Unfortunately, there's even less to experience if you've already seen the Berserk movies. This game is strictly for people that are either massive fans of Berserk or ones that don't know anything and want a fun place to start. And there you go. Now the long version of the review goes like this. Before playing this game, I knew absolutely nothing about Berserk, other than the fact that it has an incredibly popular ongoing manga, and that it's so brutal that it'll make adults lose their innocence a second time. That, and knowing that it's a Musou game, I was starting to wonder how this game would distinguish itself from the rest of the press the square button a lot to win crowd. In terms of the gameplay, it doesn't. But it absolutely does in the story side of things. In the same way that Psycho-Pass Mandatory Happiness turned me into a fan of Psycho-Pass, the same thing happened when playing Berserk and the Band of the Hawk. As previously mentioned, Berserk and the Band of the Hawk is based on the popular Berserk franchise, spanning over a long-running manga, 3 movies, a 1997 anime, and the newest 2016 series. Even though Omega Force, the developers of this game, had a lot to work with, they decided to go for inserting scenes from the films into the game, which was probably the best decision to make. Seeing how they weaved the movie scenes together with the gameplay reminded me a lot of the early PlayStation 1 days, in which you would usually find movie-licensed games containing scenes from the movies they were based on, in a similar fashion to how Berserk currently does it. Regardless of what source material the game is based on, the story is pretty simple to understand, though it does start to become bigger and much more involved over time. The world of Berserk focuses on the lone mercenary Guts, who gets roped into joining the Band of the Hawk, a group of other mercenaries led by Griffith, a massive control freak that will stop at nothing to get the power he wants. Even though many people, and the game itself, tote Berserk as an action-packed, brutal pile of sword-swinging, the narrative shines the brightest during its more quiet moments. Whenever the fights are over and the dust settles, seeing the complicated relationship that Guts has with various characters, and the way that this medieval world changes is fascinating to see. Knowing that this game is essentially a very short and compressed version of the story, and a heavily censored one at that, it makes me excited to get into things like the manga and anime series for the full experience. Unfortunately, this is where a few problems lie. Bear in mind that this entire opinion is coming from someone that knew nothing about the world of Berserk, so everything to me is brand new. If you're a fan, you have very likely already seen what this game has to offer, especially if we're talking about the game literally copy-pasting scenes from the movie onto the levels. This wouldn't be a problem if the gameplay was interesting enough to recommend, but it really isn't. Now don't get me wrong, I thought the combat was pretty fun like most Musou games. They're actually pretty good at making you feel powerful and awesome. But if I didn't know any better, they could have changed the name of the game to anything else and I would not have been able to tell the difference. If you observe other Musou games like One Piece, Pirate Warriors 3, and even Hyrule Warriors, they are immediately recognizable for their art style, incredibly distinguishable characters, and different styles of combat, even though they all share the same overall structure. When it comes to Berserk, it's mostly big dudes swinging swords, and it doesn't really get too different until way later into the game. Sometimes they ride horses, through a very drab backdrop as they swing swords some more, but not much in terms of the big bulk of the gameplay. There's not a lot of variety in either the combat nor characters that makes the levels feel very interesting. Most of the time I wanted to just get all of the fighting over with so that I can continue watching the movie clips, which is why I think this might end up being worse for people who have already seen these films. There are some in-game dialogue scenes as well, but these aren't exactly what I would consider of a satisfying quality, at least not in the Vita version. The console and PC versions are fine, running at 60 FPS with very sharp visuals. However, the Vita version of the game that was provided for me for this review looks, sounds, and feels like a rough draft of a PlayStation 2 game. Now, I love the PlayStation 2, but, this is not exactly what I was expecting out of a Vita game. Even the PlayStation Vita version of Attack on Titan is a lot better than this. The models for the main characters look decent, but then it gets strange and robotic whenever they are tasked with expressing emotion. It doesn't help that when placing the dialogue on autoplay, it could potentially win an award for having the worst pacing in video game dialogue of all time. On top of that, the frame rate drops are all over the place, to the point that not even the text boxes scroll smoothly if there's one person too many on screen all at once. This isn't getting into the horrible sound throughout, which sounds strangely muffled and low quality. This is most apparent when slashing down enemies that you notice fading into existence a couple of inches in front of you. Again, this is all happening in the Vita version. I've seen some footage of the PS4 and the PC versions, and none of those seem to have that problem. All of these issues become a lot more noticeable when you're playing it on a PlayStation TV, in which you can blow out the image to television size. This shows a few other problems, like the game's touch controls not translating to a gamepad. In the game, you can do a variety of different things by touching the different corners of the screen, like locking on, calling to your horse, transformations, among other stuff. Now, when playing the game on a PS TV with the gamepad, you obviously can't do any of that. The only way to do any of this would be to come to a complete stop in the middle of the action, bring up the integrated hand cursor on the PS TV, press the corner of the screen that you need to press, take the cursor out, and then start moving again. This is a massive hassle and can make the difference between winning and getting your ass kicked, especially during the later parts of the game. You do eventually adjust to all of this, and the game is still pretty fun. I enjoyed myself quite a bit. But these are all problems that the other versions, and other Musou games for that matter, do not have. In conclusion, I would say that if you are a person who is interested in getting into Berserk, but you don't know where to start, I would recommend the console and the PC version of this game, and then bolting to go watch the movies afterwards. Even though I absolutely adore the PlayStation Vita, it is one of my favorite consoles, honestly, and I do find it impressive that it can run games of this level at all, I would still not recommend this particular version of the game over any other. Now, as for people who are already fans of Berserk, there is very little here that's new, but maybe you'll still have fun being able to play as your favorite character from the franchise. This game is a pretty good crash course for Berserk, but I don't see people replaying this after the credits roll, instead of preferring everything else that is out there instead of the game that is actually based on.